Better. I'm Vincent Riemer, and I'm going to be talking about a little side project I've been working on for the past year or so. So first, who is this guy? That's me. I'm a software engineer at Symantec, amateur music producer, just general software mashup artist, and unreliable narrator. So this project, or the idea for it, really starts in January of 2017. It was about 5 months after I'd released my first side project, the IO808, which was a drum machine written in React and Redux. And that first week in January, I got an email from the React Amsterdam conference inviting me to talk about it and give a musical performance. And obviously, immediately after I got the email, I was on top of the world. I had never given a talk before, and it was just extremely humbling to get. But then, soon after, we're talking like hours, this quickly turns into panic. But you get through it. You get through that anxiety, and I finally made it, and it was a lot of fun. I don't know if you can see me there. Oh, that's not me. There I am, way in the back, really nervous, because actually this was taken immediately before my talk, not after. But it went really well. And before this, I had never thought about giving a talk. But now I got that itch. I wanted to give more talks. So it got me thinking, what am I going to do next? I had built a project and talked about it for my first talk, so obviously I need to build a new project so I can talk about it. So I started brainstorming, the first of which was related to yoga. Now, raise your hands, how many people are familiar with yoga? Yeah, that's about the amount I figured. So yoga, or yoga layout, is the C++ implementation of Flexbox that React Native uses on iOS and Android. And my idea was, why don't we bring this to the web? Now I know what you're thinking, why? We already have Flexbox in CSS. Why would you want to bring a custom implementation of it, especially a C++ one, onto the web browser? But I had theories about, what if layout was really decoupled from rendering? Because in the DOM, you can't actually query or measure layout without rendering to the actual DOM. And being able to access those properties and do things with them before you actually apply real layout. So I started doing some proof of concepts. This is 2 years ago, actually. Just done in userland React. Nothing very impressive. It's actually slightly worse than CSS layout behavior. But then a year later, I pushed it a little further, and you start animating between those layout changes, and you really start to see the potential of power for this. But with yoga, you can't partially use yoga for layout. You can't just have certain areas be done with layout with yoga. You need to have basically yoga handling layout for your entire app, and that's difficult to do in sort of a component library. So Fiber was sort of in development at the time, and they had the custom renderer API. So I was kind of looking forward to use that to be able to do yoga sort of by default with all your components. But it was still a little too far out, so I needed to continue looking for an idea. I then started looking more towards React, but my little twist on it was I wanted to really try my best to bring React into the web worker and run in a web worker. Now, there was prior art to this. Ram from the React Native core team had a pair of blog posts about making React faster using web workers. And this is the sort of architecture that he came up with, where all of your app logic and the actual React reconciliation happens in the web worker. And then instead of rendering to actual DOM commands, it would render to essentially JSON commands that you would send over the web worker, and the main thread would handle actually rendering those. And it was actually surprisingly elegant. This is a little sort of high overview of what it looked like. He actually created a sort of proof of concept of it, and it was very elegant. Instead of React DOM rendering a component, you rendered a worker instance. And in the worker, that's where you would define your components, and you would render them there. But then it got tricky once you actually started implementing the components. Now, in this case, this is like a React router style link. And the real issues behind this is in the handle click function. And both of the lines inside this function don't actually work in this architecture. Events need to be prevented. If you want to prevent an event, it needs to be done synchronously, which you can't do if you're communicating over a web worker post message, because those are asynchronous. And in a web worker, you don't have access to all the DOM APIs that you're used to. You don't have access to the history API. So if this really needs to work, you need to figure out a new sort of architecture for handling events. You need to figure out a generic way of calling DOM APIs from a web worker. And it was just, even in this brainstorming stage, it was becoming more and more overwhelming, so I moved on. I next took a look at React Native. I actually hadn't worked in React Native at all before this point. And really, I wanted to learn it, see if I could get any inspiration from it. So I just started building apps. First of which was this music app that helped me keep up to date on the latest electronic music that I was interested in, really getting used to the animated API. And then after that, this was just with tab bar iOS, so not really very intense navigation. So soon after, I heard about the React navigation library. So I built, just a quick movie app to test out the React navigation API, and I really enjoyed it. In here, you can see the gestures and the really smooth animations, and there's even some layout animations in there. And overall, I really liked it. Coming from a web background, I was really surprised. I thought it would be extremely similar to React, but in certain ways, it was actually better. I didn't feel like I was fighting the platform as much, and the components were already extremely functional, those base components, view and text versus div and span. So my idea, or what I wanted to do was, I want to bring that experience to the web. So the obvious next point I looked at was React Native Web. And so I started just building apps in React Native Web. This was a prototype of a sort of home automation UI that I was working on. And at some point, I actually don't really remember the reason why, I also implemented my resume in React Native Web. I think the full stack was data from GraphQL rendered in React Native Web, and then that gets rendered to PDF using Puppeteer. Yeah, I don't know what I was thinking. But I want to start this next part with a disclaimer. These are sort of gut feelings I just felt while using React Native Web. I actually still really like the framework and will likely continue to use it. I don't really have time to sing its praises, just enough time to talk about my issues. So I guess if I needed to sum it up in one phrase, my problem is React Native Web is web first. I don't know if you guys are familiar or have built React Native Web, but if you're coming from a React Native project, you need to set up Webpack, which React Native does not use Webpack, so now you have a parallel build system. Your native views or sort of custom views and custom modules that are very web specific, they're done in a single file, and if they use a DOM API, you're now also completely incompatible with the React Native ecosystem. There's no bridge to sort of abstract away those platform-specific properties. And then, like, Yoga implements Flexbox, but it doesn't behave exactly the same. Like, we get in React Native this aspect ratio prop, which is amazing, and I really wish that it existed on the web, but it doesn't, and you need to take that into account while developing. And then just in general, there's gaps in the views and modules that are available in React Native Web. It's just not practical. Like, the web wasn't built to do some of these modules or APIs like layout animation. And ultimately, this all comes together to form a sort of uncanny valley. Like, yeah, it looks like React Native on the surface, but once you start using it, you start to see those cracks. So I finally got my final sort of project idea that I wanted to tackle, and it starts with the question, what if React Native on the web was web first, or native first? I already did that. And by that I mean, like, completely disregard the way the web does things. Like, throw away all best practices. When you ask the question, like, oh, how am I going to architect this? How am I going to implement this? Look at the way React Native proper, like the iOS, like Objective-C code does it, and try to do it in that same way. So if we go down the line of what we need to implement, the first big one is architecture. And there was this was one of the slides from the announcement of React Native from Tomachino, showing sort of the highest level architecture of the React Native bridge. And I don't know about you, but it looks kind of similar to the React in a web worker architecture. And so that's what I did. And with this React Native bridge being sort of the communication layer between that, it solves a lot of the problems that I had. And this causes, we finally have usable React in a web worker. And you never really, in React Native, communicate or use DOM-specific APIs. So if you're comfortable writing React Native, you'll be comfortable writing this, because it's just, if you assume it has the same environment as React Native on mobile, you're going to feel comfortable. And I even got to, like, cheat a little bit. I was lazy, and I could use the same React Native JS code on that web worker. It's the same sort of environment, so I actually didn't need to rewrite the whole worker side, just the native side. And the ability to call those DOM APIs is still possible, because if you've ever written a native module on iOS, you have that ability to go to the native thread, and it works the exact same way. You have that native module that has access to the DOM, and you just bridge it to the sort of public APIs that you write the actual app in. And then you can support advanced features with this architecture, like animated's use native driver. So your animation runs on the main thread separately from your web worker thread. And that's what this architecture provides. Moving on, about layout, well, I got to work on another idea that I had previously. Layout is also powered by Yoga, which provides the same layout behavior, so there's less of those quirks that you need to worry about. You get the aspect ratio prop. You get on layout events that are fired at the correct time, which they're actually fired before everything is rendered. And you can even get layout animations, because you have the values, so you can calculate the animations before the layout is applied. and just apply them as animations before. You can apply them as animations instead of just applying them purely as layout. And then, so Yoga has ASM.js bindings, but I wanted to take it a little further. So I compiled it to WebAssembly instead, and with my own custom bindings, just to squeeze. It's about half the size of the ASM.js bindings, and it's slightly faster. Why not? And then finally, the developer experience. I mentioned some of the problems with the build system, and the developer experience with this would be powered by Metro, the React Native packager. You wouldn't need Webpack. It would just be, an extra platform like iOS, Android, Windows. It would just live in that ecosystem alongside with it. And you get the same sort of asset loading behavior, keeping track of the width and height when you require something locally. You could run a single packager and build multiple platforms at the same time, and even hot reload multiple platforms at the same time, including web. And you even get access to nice developer experience features that Metro provides, like clicking on a stack frame in Redbox and having it open up in your editor. That's all possible if you, just use Metro. So this is, I guess, the time where I'd like to introduce my project. I'm calling it React Native DOM, and it's an experimental comprehensive port of React Native to the web. But this has just been a lot of talking, right? Like, you guys want to see it? So sort of a trick question, because you've been seeing it this entire time. This presentation is written in it, and I can prove it by, let's bring up the inline inspector, the React Native inline inspector. And you can go in and look at all that sort of, I don't know why you would necessarily need to use it, but why not? I got it for free. And then as another sort of proof, here's this presentation running in the iOS simulator using the same exact code, complete with all of the same animations and features. And then I also sort of lied before as well. If you remember that sort of movie app that I used to test learning React navigation, this one, that's actually not a native app. That's a web app running in iOS standalone mode, complete with gestures. So I can move to a more concrete demo, and we're going to focus a little bit on that movie demo. So the source is just very much a React Native app. It can run on iOS or Android, and starting it up is actually like starting up any other React Native. It's actually slightly less than starting up an iOS and Android app. You just need to start the packager. And I have the command ready here, so it's a React Native start. I'm going to reset the cache as well. Just get Metro Bundler up and running and refresh. And so right now, it's essentially building the native thread, sort of like doing Xcode's job. But then it needs to do the JS thread. And you get that same developer feedback that you get on native with the inline bundler progress. And so here it is running in Chrome. If we click on this, it's not good. But we can fix this easily, as I mentioned. You can just click on the, oh, there it is. Yeah, that would do it. So let's fix that. Hopefully, this works. Oh, there we go. And so like you get that full sort of, you get the parallax, you get the sort of transitions between, and you even get, so this actor list, you have a show more, and you have the layout animation API. So with that same sort of just before the state change where it shows 3 more, you just call layout animation configure next, and this is the result of that. And this is really hard to do with a trackpad, but you also get the iOS gestures that you would get before. And then full on, you know, modal, that's also gesture based. I think I implemented this using pointer events, so it's, you know, normalized between touch and mouse. And as a final little demo, as sort of, this was a stretch goal for this talk, React Europe has a native app, right? Like, you know, you can build, you have that app to keep track of the schedule. So I decided to bring it to the web, and it is more or less fully functional. You can go in, see all the speakers, and I think I can show this off. There we go. So I don't have much time left. If you want to actually try these out for yourself, here are the links to the demos. I can't keep it up too long. I only have 3 minutes left. But yeah. We good? Better? So I want to sort of say, as like manage expectations, like don't like really use this just yet. No, it's still very early. You know, I'm just a single person working on this, and there's still quite a few issues. I mentioned before, you know, it's sort of throw all web best practices out the window in order to do whatever I want, and that doesn't come without consequences. So the bundle sizes are huge. You know, like everybody, sort of all the frameworks brag about their sort of Hello World bundle size. This Hello World bundle size is around 500 kilobytes, gzipped. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of progress we can do, just because a lot of this code wasn't built to be run on the web. So with that focus, we can probably improve that in the future. There are still some performance bottlenecks. Text measurement is still an issue. Those actually are rendered to the DOM and measured in hidden divs, because, you know, Yoga can't do text measurement. But there are APIs coming up in the future that will provide the ability to do it without rendering to the DOM. So I guess we can look forward to those when they come in 10 years. And then just the React Native core is really big. There are just some components I haven't gotten to yet. Text input, it hasn't been done yet. But I mean, you know, we'll just get to them eventually. And if anybody is willing to contribute, I am open to contributors. I think this could be a great community project for moving the web forward. And you know, the old sort of software development adage, make it work, then make it right, and then make it fast. Like, this project is still very much in the make it work stage. And I'm hoping in the future we can eventually get to make it fast. But you know, if at the very least we get to learn some new ideas that we can apply to other projects, like this sort of works as a stomping ground for really crazy architectures and implementations that you can fool around with, because this architecture is very flexible. So the future, I'd like to see if I can achieve async or multi-threaded layout, because I am doing layout completely in userland. Like, why can't I put that in its own web worker? Right now, text measurement is the blocker for that, but if we can get text measurement in a web worker, we would be able to do that. I'd like to convert more of the project to WebAssembly. Some of the modules, maybe go module by module, the ones that seem to need the performance more. Migrate those to WebAssembly, just like yoga works in WebAssembly. It's planned. There's nothing keeping you from implementing true PWA and service worker. You have the ability to write all that, but I'd like to create a more streamlined experience where it's sort of, the app.json, and it would create that sort of service worker configuration for you. And then sort of the longest term goal is I want to skip the DOM entirely. I want to render to WebGL, so like I get to do everything, right? Like, I mean, why let the DOM have all the fun? So if you want to follow the project, it's up on GitHub under my name and under React Native DOM. Just made it public before the presentation. And if you just want to follow me, I'm here on Twitter. Ask me questions. If you're here and have any questions, come to me. If there are people on the stream or online who have questions, ask me on Twitter. I'll be probably tweeting about this for the next month or two to go over all the little implementation details that went into this. But yeah, thanks.